Thank you, Dr. Chin. First of all, I'd like to thank ISIS and Barry Wain for inviting me to be a commentator of this very exciting assignment for me, because I was one of the first to be able to have a copy of the book. In fact, I was the only one at one time to have the copy of the book, at least before even Barry had extra copy. So I find it, well, I was a bit ambivalent actually when Barry asked me to do this, because I was wondering whether he had asked me to do this because, first of all, maybe I was already infamous about my own criticisms of Mahathir, or because I was a Malay, and that being a Malay, you see, I could blunt his own sharp criticism of Mahathir. But I think little did he know that I think I'm going to be sharper in my criticism of Mahathir. So my first reaction when I got the book was, how could this book be any different from the several others that had already come out? For example, the one by Kubute on the paradoxes of Mahathirism, and a bit more, another one published by ISIS itself, in Won Huang's book titled Personalized Politics. Not forgetting the voluminous number of articles and commentaries on just this one personality. So I was very delighted, quote unquote, that after going through the first few chapters of the book, I knew that this book was going to be very different. In fact, it was going to be more impactful and more of a fine strike at the core of the matter. I think that was the first reaction when I started reading the first few lines of Barry's book. So everyone knows that Mahathir has remained enigmatic so far. He seems to be unmoved by the tons of criticisms directed at him. Well, perhaps this was balanced by the heaps of adulation and fawning by his coterie of loyalists, as exemplified by the quality and quantity of comments that he would receive in his own blogs. Some of his postings would attract like about up to 1,000 comments, and if you read the comment, it will really be like starting with Yang Dikasihi Tun, meaning dear beloved Tun, and so on and so forth. So you would see that the power of this man, I think, is still very much in the air. In gossip circles, we all know that people say that Mahathir has the thickest skin in the world and was impervious to any verbal assaults on his character. So I doubt that this book would make any difference to him. People are astounded by his ability to trounce all of his rivals. Even when he's out of power, he was able to get rid of one more enemy, no less the Prime Minister of Malaysia. So after he survived, he was discredited by at least 5 major financial scandals, and still had the audacity to reprimand his heir apparent, Abdullah Badawi, by sniping. I don't know whether you read his latest, or the last 2 blogs, but this is his own quote. Abdullah Badawi was a real Mr. Clean, yes. His Mr. Clean image meant that he had cleaned everything up. So the following had become standard facts, not just opinions. 1, he had destroyed the independence of the judiciary. He had controlled the media to his liking, and still able to say that he was denied his freedom of expression at the height of his conflict with Abdullah Badawi. So it appears that there is no remorse in the man, nothing could break him, and he remained confident right up to Barry Wain's last line in his book, when he said that he would someday be vindicated. For those reasons, I think Mahathir is a tale worth telling and retelling. And what I like most about this book is that it just tells the story as it is, rather than try to link the episodes to some abstract generalizations or theoretical framework. It makes the book really rich because it does not straitjacket the reader into thinking within a particular frame or towards a particular direction. The book charts the rise of Mahathir. He's stepping down, small steps actually, because he was never a hairbreadth away from the center of power. So the book is written, to me, the first thing that hits me is that the book is written in a very breezy and riveting style, thanks to your journalistic background. Thank goodness it's not written by an academic. well, really, at some parts, it was almost like a political thriller. And I think that it would make a great material for a film of that genre. is that it is not fiction, and were a film to be made on Mahathir, it would really be a case of art imitating life. It is indeed an achievement that Barry's book manages to focus on the personal Mahathir, which in the end ends up as a powerful treatise of the public Malaysia. So I will move on now to picking up some of the very useful and actually very significant contribution of the book. First, on the concept. I think from 1981 till today, Mahathir has given Malaysia its particular feature as a state. I think that's the first thing that has come up from looking at the persona of Mahathir itself. So the most useful, if not intriguing concept that Barry has stated in describing Malaysia under Mahathir was that he had created a party state. And I think these two words, which was only mentioned once in his book, I think, Barry, on page 53, I think this is the most useful concept that we can suddenly extrapolate what was going on behind this persona. The other useful contribution of the book is that it has provided much data to chart the birth of this party state, its peaking and its possible eventual decline. Back to the concept of the party state, even though Barry did not elaborate this in the book, but to me it was a trademark of the Mahathir rule. Yet elsewhere there were already studies on this concept. For example, a study by Carl Fields on the Kuomintang in Taiwan, where he did use this concept, and he noticed the blurring of the distinction between the party and the state. And that was the feature of this party state. This is what Mahathir, I think, well, this is my own reading of it. Of course, Barry does not try to, as I said, abstract or generalize from his study of this man. But I think this particular phenomenon of the party state was something that could be really associated with Mahathir, and I think, and that is why up to today, the Malaysia that we're seeing now is not much transformed since 1981. Well, I summarize Barry's suggestion of some of the same phenomena, this party state, in Malaysia. These are some of the features, and you can see all these throughout the books. For example, he had weakened state and informal institutions. Number two, he had packed the state bureaucracy with loyalists rather than technocrats. He had intervened to subdue the judiciary so that it would yield results whenever he or the party's political control would be endangered. He had downgraded the status of MCA and MIC within the coalition. They were all equal partners before this. He had essentially merged Mahathir with Malaysia. So that was what we had, or Malaysia had for the last 20-something years. Malaysia was nothing but Mahathir. Now, I think not that he wasn't aware of this view, because if you notice in his writings that lately he had become quite defensive about this assessment of himself. In one of the more recent blogs, he had insinuated, I'll just quote, this was a blog that was put up on the 20th of November, about 2 weeks ago. Quote unquote, "Thank you for agreeing that I am a dictator. Tell me which dictator ever resigns." Unquote. Okay, let me now try to suss out other more important insights and revelations from some of the chapters. I think some of you have the books with you, but I don't know how much you have looked through the book, but I consider chapters 3 to 6 as the most crucial in charting the growth of the party state helmed by this strong man. Chapter 3 is especially critical. It showed how Mahathir had achieved his crowning moment in deploying his political and Machiavellian skills in saving himself and the party. It started with the maneuver to outdo Tengku Razali and the threat of a legal pronouncement that would spell the death knell for him as well as UMNO. Now, I think this moment provided the greatest motivation for him to upset the separation of powers doctrine of the modern states. And what was remarkable was that he resolved this issue in less than 4 months. I think not many people would go through the trouble of charting the time span. But it took him less than 4 months, really. And the 4 months that shook Malaysia involved 1, the pronouncements of UMNO's illegality. Number 2, the registration of the new UMNO, which is actually a new party, not even UMNO, just given the name UMNO Baru. He ousted half of the members from the original UMNO. He sacked the Lord President. He sacked 5 Supreme Court judges, and he's transferred $1 billion worth of assets of the old UMNO into the new UMNO. All these achieved in 4 months. So it was on the 27th of May 1988 that the Lord President Tun Saleh Abbas was suspended from his office, and this was done by the then king, who is now the Sultan of Johor, King Mahmud Iskandar. This is the most intriguing moment for me, as Mahathir had managed to use his skills as a blackmailer to persuade the king to sign the letter of dismissal in return for protection from being removed from his throne. Because there were already talks and evidence that the king at that time was involved in the murder of his caddy. Now this is, I think, quite an explosive revelation. Explosive in the sense that it is not that people didn't know about this, but I think that the fact that it was put in black and white in the book is very significant. But I think Barry has covered his tracks because basically the allegations of this killing had actually been verified in the interviews that Barry did with both Mahathir and Anwar. And I think this is the most important, implication of this book, that both Mahathir and Anwar had volunteered this information, that it was true that the king had been involved in the killing of the caddy, and in return for protecting him, that the king would then be asked to sign the letter for Saleh Abbas' suspension. Okay, this was in chapter 3, page 73. Now, one more thing that I think Barry missed out, although I may have missed it out, but I think what Barry missed out is that, sure, he was an astute manipulator of events, but one thing that shouldn't be forgotten, and I think Mahathir revealed it a few days ago in his blog, that he wouldn't have succeeded in staying on in power if not for the MCA. I don't know what you mentioned in the book, I may have missed it somewhere, but he really owed a debt of gratitude to Ling Leong-sik, who actually became the first Chinese to become leader of the National Front. Now this is a part of history, I think, that people have not realized. In the midst of UMNO being involved in the whole imbroglio about their deregistration, Ling Leong-sik became the leader of the National Front. And as a leader of the National Front, Ling Leong-sik actually had a choice of accepting either Tengku Razali's party, Semangat 46 at that time, or Mahathir's new party, the UMNO Baru, into the coalition. And of course, he accepted Mahathir's UMNO Baru. So what did Mahathir say in this blog? This was a blog of November 23rd this year, and he stated it publicly that, quote, "But for Leong-sik, the MCA president, who headed BN, accepting UMNO Baru and not Semangat 46, life would have been difficult for me," unquote. I think this is very revelatory in a sense. Yeah, you could be very astute, but you still need a helping hand somewhere along the way. So, from the events of 1988, Barry then traced how the episode just spelled an uphill ascendance of Mahathir, the astute autocrat, but in actual fact, a downhill trajectory for Mahathir, or the destruction of the scrupulous and ethical leader, as some others would see it. So, it depends on how you see it. He was on the ascendance on one hand, on the other hand, it was a complete downhill trajectory for Mahathir from 1988 onwards. Now this is when the notion of the party state could really take shape. UMNO had to get into business, and UMNO had to undermine the state in order to replace the state with itself. Barry's book pointed out that under the Societies Act of 1966, the party is not permitted to do business. But UMNO had to conceal its assets by setting up nominee companies and executives or trusted individuals who held stakes in various companies. But by 1988, UMNO was already accumulating vast amount of resources under this arrangement. Chapter 5 seems to suggest that the re-registration and deregistration of the UMNO episode had put the party's financial standing in a quandary. Now here is where the wizardry of Daim Zainuddin, the former finance minister, came into the picture. The mix of politics and business to UMNO's advantage would not have happened if not for Daim and his boys, of course. The party before was extremely poor. In an embarrassing detail, in chapter 3, the book cited interviews with Tengku Razali, who said that UMNO was so dependent on the MCA and Chinese businessmen to fund the election campaign, including paying for routine expenses such as taxi taxi costs, transport costs to go to give their talks in the rural villages. So that was how bad UMNO was before they got into business. To be fair, the involvement of UMNO in business did not start with Mahathir and Daim, but with Tun Razak and Tengku Razali from as way back as in 1972 with the creation of the secret UMNO Political Fund. No one has access to this UMNO Political Fund, not even UMNO members themselves. Well, Cooley, of course, defended this move because of this need to be financially independent. Well, Daim came into the picture in 1982, a year after Mahathir had become Prime Minister, and took his role in fashioning UMNO into a corporation to great heights. In Barry's words, Daim was the one who would be primarily responsible for integrating business and politics in Malaysia. Now, according to Barry, Mahathir merely made the philosophical connection rather than having a hands-on role in the whole matter. In one of the most classic defenses of why Daim did not think that there was any conflict of interest between making money for himself, making money for the party, and making money for the nation, he declared a series of why nots. I'll quote this. This is Daim's own words. Quote, "If I think the government can make money with me, why not? Since I have details of the company and I think it is good investment for my family, why not? If everybody is going to make money, why not?" Unquote. So that was a classic Daim. Now, chapter 6, titled Scandal, What Scandal, is also a riveting read. In this chapter, Barry revisits the old financial scandals by presenting them as a series of Mahathir failures. From the mid-1980s to the late 1990s, this was a decade of serial failures for Mahathir. Financially, Mahathir was a serial failure. The events and background of the tin trading fiasco, the BMF affair, the forex thrashing, and the Perwaja mess, all these were clearly and lucidly documented in this chapter. Now, the conservative estimate of the worth of these failures was 100 billion Malaysian ringgit. What is useful about this chapter is not that any of these shenanigans had not been exposed before. I think Malaysians had already been exposed, had read about them, but having them all together in one read allows one to discern a certain pattern of the party state. Underneath all these involvements, which Mahathir lamely claimed to have been misinformed, or that he was not really culpable in some of the acts, there were sort of underlying justifications for the need to get into all these so-called adventures in a big way. One, there was this, I think, as a chip on the shoulder, but first of all, there was a need to rescue UMNO itself from financial ruin. Maybank and Bank Bumiputera ended up paying for the cost of UMNO's headquarters. Number two, he had to justify economic involvement of the economic of UMNO as a means of creating the new Bumiputera entrepreneurial class, basically in the form of Daim and his boys. Third, there was a need to stand up against the West, to take on the developed countries at their own game. For example, the tin caper and the forex trading were maneuvers to outfox the Western economies. Sadly, all of the above had succeeded in generating was endemic and appalling corruption, as in the case of the BMF and Perwaja affairs. But the worst thing about this, the whole episode, was that nobody had ever been prosecuted under Malaysian laws for any of these misappropriations. Well, the other chapters, chapter 7 is about Mahathir's pension for big projects and colossal structures. Chapter 8 is another interesting chapter as it describes in great detail how Mahathir had tamed the Malay royalty by getting rid of the judicial immunity. But I think in looking at the current situations, which involved UMNO fighting the royalty, it isn't clear that the amendments actually had much bite in preventing royal intervention and meddling. Now, chapter 9 is about the use of pragmatic Islam, which I'm not exactly convinced that Mahathir had a big hand in it. Yes, he was there, here and everywhere, but I have my own thesis about the whole development of Islam in Malaysia. Chapter 10 is about his performance in the foreign relations stage. I would say that he was most successful as a third world persona, admired by outsiders as a champion of the southern underdogs, but even so, he did not go the full mile in resisting the West, as he was quite easily persuaded For example, in supporting many unpopular resolutions such as the one which approved the invasion of Iraq in 1990. And of course, he worked very hard under questionable circumstances to have a meeting with Bush in 2002. So you could see him, yes, as a rebel, but in the end, he succumbed to many things which was considered mainstream action. So while the book is an excellent account of events from the vantage point of an outsider, I think, of course, Barry himself is also an insider, having spent many years in Malaysia as well as in this region. But basically, it is still a bird's eye view of one person as the central character in this book. I think a picture of Malaysia would not have been complete if the big players and the marginal actors were also not considered. So in this regard, the book says little about the involvement of civil society or even his detractors in being responsible for many of his reactions and backlashes. Nevertheless, what I found interesting was Barry seems to have featured DAP leader Lim Kit Siang in almost every chapter, prominently as the most consistent monitor and admonisher of Mahathir's wrongdoings and transgressions. So I think another book on the man, Lim Kit Siang, will be a welcome addition to the list of political biographies of Malaysian leaders. Okay, finally, let me just look at the book as a platform for theorization and generalization. I think there are many ways of looking at history. One way is to have all the analysis centered around one person, as Barry had expertly done. But the other way is to look at the entity in which this person operates from a larger, or what academics say, a longue durée perspective, which is to look at transformational moments rather than transformational persons. So looking at history this way, I could view Malaysia differently. For example, I would ask the questions, what were the iconic moments in Malaysia's transformations? Okay, my take is that there are three iconic moments in Malaysia, in Malaysian history. One, it was 1969. Now this was not just because of the riots, but it was the year that triggered a structural revolution in the form of the new economic policy for Malaysia. This changed race relations, entrenched Malay dominance as the foundational politics of Malaysia. The second iconic moment was 1982. Now why do I say this was an iconic moment? This marked the takeoff of state Islamization in Malaysia. The entry of Anwar Ibrahim into government provided the wide discourse of Islam in government as well as private lives. Now, UMNO began to build on Islam for its legitimacy, but it wasn't so much that the party had become more Islamic, because what it did was it just transferred that whole mission onto the state. The state was the one that became Islamic, not the party. So it was the state which carried the role and the image of Islam, not the party itself. Now this, I think, is a bit of a contradiction after saying that he had created a party state, but in some ways, there were too many contradictory missions, I think, within the party itself. One was the whole mission to aggrandize economically, and I think that would kind of get in the way of the Islamization project. So I think Mahathir was quite clear that he did the Islamization project or kept it within the state, but allowed UMNO to go on doing the kind of what I call the economic transgression, economic and political transgressions on its own. Because I think combining the two would then just undermine this whole project. So in a way, I think that this whole Islamization of the state may have masked all the financial scandals and mismanagement by the party, because it diverted the Malay masses' concern onto other seemingly transcendental concerns. It was too worldly, see, the whole financial scandal was too worldly, the whole Machiavellian trickery was too worldly, or I think the masses to take too seriously, which is why UMNO kept winning elections year after year. Okay? And Mahathir was so proud that because after 1988 he said that the fact that we had won election showed that we had done the right thing. And this was even in his latest blog. He was trying to say that that was the only way that we could do it. Now, the third iconic moment was, of course, I think, arguably, it was 2008. It was 2008, the year of the 12th general election. It was iconic for several reasons. It was the first time that the National Front lost its two-thirds majority. It was also the first time that all opposition parties, now I stress all opposition parties, succeeded in becoming governments. PAS became the government of Kelantan. and Kedah, the DAP became the government of Penang, and the Parti Keadilan Rakyat became the government of Selangor. Of course, you would say that they're all in a coalition, but you could see that these three states are actually ruled by different opposition parties. So if you look at all the above moments, the three moments, where was Mahathir in all this? Surprisingly, he was not the main actor or the primary mover of these moments. 1969 and the NEP were Razak's moments, with Mahathir being still a marginal player, even though he had come out with his Malay dilemma ideas, but he wasn't really in the kitchen cabinet or a part of the team that crafted the new economic policy. 1982 was Anwar's moment, with Mahathir, yes, playing a key role, but it was only in getting him into the party, although Mahathir was not at all central in the Islamic resurgent movement. He was not at all, not even mildly there within that movement. So it was Anwar in 1982. And of course in 2008, it was Anwar again as the main player and galvanizer of that event. Which makes it very ironic because Barry puts in a lot of quotes about Anwar really not doing anything when he was under Mahathir, which was true. I mean, you know, he didn't affect many things, but if you look at history differently, he was there at the right moment. So Mahathir may be here, there, and everywhere, but all the time, ultimately, actually, he was fighting for regime maintenance. This was a thesis provided by In Won Wang, the author of Personalized Politics. Well, Mahathir was also full of grand visions, according to Khoo Kay Jin, who wrote an earlier piece, full of paradoxes, according to Khoo Boo Teck. But by Mahathir's own admittance himself, he said that he failed in reforming UMNO as well as the Malays. So, I mean, big question mark. What was he actually responsible for? So let me just conclude by posing more questions than can be answered about the man. I'm sure this will trigger off other books also. First, let me ask a question, maybe to you or to Barry. Was he a failure or a success as a leader? Number two, well, if Anwar had succeeded in inheriting the position of Prime Minister after Mahathir, would Anwar have continued the legacy of the party state and party capitalism? Or maybe because of that he was got rid of. Number two, in being obsessive about functioning within the UMNO mold, you could see that Mahathir was obsessive about UMNO. Can we still call him a maverick or a mainstreamer? Okay. So my conclusion, this is my own conclusion, is that he stirred many events, but he did not shake the system. He was a stirrer, not a shaker. So despite the seemingly iconoclastic and non-conformist positions and posturings that he took, how much of the world or Malaysia did he change? The fact that I find myself asking these questions attests to the valuable contribution of this book, and I'm very sure that it will fly off the shelf for many reasons, not least because it is a riveting and thought-provoking read. Thank you.